Anyone who knows anything about war throughout history knows that on countless occasions animals have been used for the betterment of armed forces around the world. However, not every method used by these various military forces can be seen as conventional, especially when animals are involved. In fact, with some of these tactics, it's downright surprising how interesting they are. Stick around while we take a look at some of the most unconventional war tactics using animals. First up, we have a missile system that was developed by a behaviorist named B.F. Skinner and has since been dubbed Project Pigeon. Now, pigeons have been used in warfare for centuries and beyond, with some of the first accounts of carrier pigeons dating all the way back to the 6th century BC. For the most part, when used in warfare, a pigeon was typically put into play to deliver a message. It's no secret that those beady-eyed birds have an amazing innate homing ability that allows them to find their way home almost every time, which makes them the perfect animal to use to send a written message from one location to another. And having this communication advantage over the enemy was invaluable and key to gaining that advantage over the enemy, especially before radios. However, Project Pigeon was a little different than your typical carrier pigeon operation. It essentially involved the idea of pigeon-guided missiles that were intended to be used during the Second World War. The missile would be outfitted with a series of lenses in front of the device that would project an image of the target onto a screen inside of the missile. Pigeon would then be conditioned to peck at the target on the screen as a way to correct the flight path of the missile. The project was ultimately cancelled due to how impractical it was. Thankfully, actual guidance systems came into play around 1953, which made the concept of pigeon-guided missiles officially dead in the water. Up next, let's take a look at one of the most famous military animals of all time, Wojtek the bear. Bears have appeared multiple times throughout wars in history, but none of them have reached the same fame and popularity as this Syrian brown bear. Wojtek was adopted by the Polish military in 1942 when the 22nd Polish Supply Brigade encountered it as a cub during its trek from Russia to Persia. According to reports, the bear grew up amongst the other soldiers and had a diet that consisted mostly of milk out of an emptied vodka bottle and beer. He essentially became a mascot for the troop and helped by carrying large supplies of ammo with the brigade during the war. This means that wherever the troop went, so did Wojtek. As World War II progressed, Wojtek would end up visiting battle zones all over the place, such as Iraq, Egypt, and even Italy. What makes Wojtek's time in the military so interesting is the fact that he wasn't only used as a mascot. In fact, by the time Wojtek was a full-grown bear, he had been enlisted as a private soldier with his own serial number and everything. By the end of the war, the bear had managed to work his way through the ranks and even became a corporal before retiring. Another massive animal that's been known to make an appearance in armed forces around the world happens to be the largest mammal on Earth. Elephants have made a name for themselves in warfare, even during ancient times, as people could see that they were capable of causing devastation. Elephants could be used to trample enemies and even stab or gore them with their tusks. And believe it or not, this method was quickly adopted all throughout India. The first mention of elephants in warfare takes place during wars in India and around the time of the 4th century BC. The practice continued for many centuries after. According to reports, war elephants were typically placed in the center of the line of soldiers, and from there they could charge at speeds of up to 20 miles per hour toward enemy lines. On top of that, unlike typical horse-mounted cavalry, the elephants weren't as affected by infantry lines that were filled with spears. This was because their trunks could be used to navigate a wall of spears much more safely than a speeding horse. The practice of using elephants in war even persisted well into the 20th century, as Iraqi troops would allegedly use elephants to transport heavy artillery and weapons to be used in Kirkuk. Now, in order to counter enemy forces that used massive animals such as elephants, other nations were forced to adapt. And oddly enough, they landed on a much smaller animal as a direct counter to the elephants. War pigs have been recorded multiple times throughout ancient texts as one of the best defenses against war elephants. According to the writings, the elephants were terrified by the sound of squealing and charging pigs, and they were even used by Alexander the Great during his campaigns against the opposing elephants. It gets crazier though. According to the reports of the siege of Megara in 266 BC, the Megarians used flaming pigs doused in combustible pitch to drive away enemies that were using war elephants. The elephants supposedly ran away in fear from the flaming pigs and in turn ended up killing large numbers of their own soldiers in the stampede. Up next, let's take a look at one of the most unpredictable animals that the CIA believed could be used to feed them important intel on the enemy: cats. These felines have earned a reputation for basically doing whatever they want, regardless of what anyone else wants. But for some reason, the Central Intelligence Agency in the 60s believed that they could utilize that. They started a project that was known as Acoustic Kitty, which was intended to be used against the Soviet embassies around the United States and other countries. The cats that were chosen for this project had technology surgically implanted into the animals that would allow them to transmit information back to the CIA agents in the area. The cat would have a microphone implanted into its ear canal, and then a radio transmitter placed into the base of its skull. The idea was that the cats would become mobile tape recorders that would report their intel right back to the CIA. However, the project was abandoned due to the fact that it was impossible to get a cat to do anything on command. If reports are correct, the failed project cost the CIA nearly $20 million. For this next animal, let's talk about the United States military and its use of marine life in operations, specifically dolphins. During the 60s, the US Navy began studying and testing dolphins to see how hydrodynamic the marine mammal was, and what made them that way, with hopes of applying the same physics to improving torpedo performance. The studies were obviously fruitful because the Navy continued to apply them, and even evolved the program into a major project by the time 1967 rolled around. Only now, the program was designed to train dolphins for underwater mine hunting. According to reports, mine-hunting dolphins have been trained to locate underwater mines that would be harmful to naval ships and submarines. Once located, the dolphin is trained to release a buoy over the mine's location, which then allows the Navy to clear or disarm the device. This practice has proved to be very successful, especially during the Iraq War in 2003, when the dolphins reportedly led to the clearing of more than 100 mines in a single port. These dolphins are also trained to protect harbors against enemy divers by bumping a buoy device onto the diver, which will then drag the enemy to the surface and expose them. How cool is that? Up next, let's take a look at one of the strangest experimental weapons that the US military tried to design: the bat bomb. And no, this isn't a weapon that Batman would have used. During World War II, almost every nation in the world was looking for the next best weapon to help their armed forces. And thanks to a former United States First Lady, the US almost got bat bombs. Eleanor Roosevelt proposed the idea of using bats to start thousands of fires all across Japan as a form of retribution for the attack on Pearl Harbor back in 1942. The plan would see 1,000 bats per bomb, each of which would be outfitted with a small incendiary device. The bats would then be placed inside a large bombshell-like casing that would then be launched from a warplane to wreak havoc. It was believed that the bats would be able to attach their explosive devices to wooden homes in Japan, as well as other larger buildings that would easily go up in flames once they were detonated. Interestingly enough, the plan for a bat bomb was only taken seriously because Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was approached by a close friend who had supposedly come up with the idea. And because of her sway as the First Lady, the US military would go on to spend upwards of $2 million on the project. However, it was eventually shut down after multiple incidents, including an army hangar being set ablaze, as well as a general's car. This next animal is actually used by the United States Navy, much like the bottlenose dolphins that we spoke about earlier in this video. The California Sealine was identified by the Navy as being a high-quality military asset due to their low light vision and their amazing underwater hearing, and since then, the Navy has been training them much like dolphins. Sea lions have been used to detect underwater threats, such as marine mines and even enemy divers. In fact, the impressive 25-mile-per-hour swim speed combined with the sea lion's ability to dive up to 1,000 feet below the surface makes them the perfect counter for enemy divers. According to reports, the US Navy has trained sea lions to attach a special cuff to the legs of human divers, which makes it hard for them to swim freely, all the while making it easier for the sea lion's handlers to bring the suspects to the surface. On top of that, the military has designed a special harness for the mammal that allows them to carry cameras and provide underwater photos and video of the surrounding area. It's believed that a single Sealine paired with 2 handlers in a small vessel could potentially replace a full-sized Navy ship. Last but definitely not least, we have one of the craziest animals ever to be used by German forces during World War II: mosquitoes. It wasn't until late in the Second World War that the German military ordered their soldiers and scientists to flood the Pontine marshes located south of Rome. This would be the first time that the marshes had been filled since they were drained back in the 20s and 30s. But after German forces took control of Italy, they ordered that water be pumped in. Their plan was to specifically use the marshes in order to attract malarial mosquitoes back into the area. Believe it or not, this plan worked, and over the following months the Germans and the Allies fought multiple battles in the Pontine marshes. However, their plan worked a little too well, and the mosquito population ended up affecting the soldiers on both sides of the battlefield. In the end, the malaria-infested mosquitoes weren't enough, and the Allied forces were able to advance. What do you think the most interesting wartime animal in today's video was? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed learning about these unconventional war tactics, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to ensure that you don't miss any more rad history.